Alright, what's poppin' everybody? Welcome back to the channel, welcome to another video. Today we're going to be reviewing Statik Selektah's Round Trip. And I know the majority of people that are watching this video may not know who Statik Selektah is or may not be too familiar with him, so I'm going to tell you a little bit about him real quick. Born January 23rd, 1982 in Lawrence, Massachusetts, Patrick Barrell had a great passion for music production at a very young age. So much so that by the time he got to middle school, he was seen DJing at his school functions. By the time he had reached age 14, he purchased his first mixer and turntable while being under the name DJ Statik at the time. Fast forward a couple years later, he enrolled in the audio production program at New England's Institute of the Arts, where he would then go on to produce records for many artists, some being AZ, Nas, Q-Tip, Royce the 5'9", John Legend, and many more. Fast forward to the year 2023, where we see Statik Selektah still dropping quality projects, some being Trill Static 2 and See a Sunset. Alright, with all that out of the way, let's dive into this album and let's get into track number 1. This album starts off with the title track being the first in the track list, which features Posness as the artist who, personally, I've never heard of, so I had no idea what I was getting into. The beat starts off with these rising strings, which brings a lot of tension for the opener. We later on get to the bass line of this track, which is simple but great. And in my opinion, Posness left nothing short of a great first impression, to me at least, with his therapeutic lines and subject matter. This song, in my opinion, was perfect for an opener, and it set the tone for this album really well. And with this track out of the way, we are 1 for 1. Let's move on to track 2. Track 2, Historic, features Ransom along with AZ as well, with a super jazzy piano beat, which sounds really nice. Ransom is first up to the stage, as he sounds fresh as ever in my opinion. He comes in with a great flow and a nice hook on top of that. Ransom on this track talks about how just because somebody may have something better than you, such as, I don't know, a house, a car, a watch, it doesn't always end up making them, the better person, or they might not be the person that they seem. He also gets into marrying the game and basically falling in love with whatever you're passionate about. We then have AZ showing up on this track with a strong feature as well, and he really hasn't showed any signs of slowing down for the 25 years that he's been in the rap game, which is impressive to say the very least. Yeah, this track was another solid one in my opinion, which brings us to 2 for 2. Let's move on to track number 3. Track number 3, Different League, takes a complete 180 beat-wise and sound-wise, as Statik Selektah provides us with this super grimy boom-bap beat, with also a nice string section in the background to tie everything off. The song features none other than Benny the Butcher, who this beat is perfect for, in my opinion. We hear Benny on this track getting into how he has some things to say to his day ones whenever he might be a little drunk and not, say it whenever he's sober. Later into this track, Benny gets into how his father was not really much of an appropriate father figure to him, and how his mother would do most of the heavy lifting. And because of this, we hear Benny talking about how, he had to take matters into his own hands at that point. He talks about how because of him moving out and away from his parents, he was kind of forced to be on his own grind, and how that made him successful from the rest. We get a nice acapella from Black Thought on the midway point of this track, so much so that the first time I listened to it, I thought he was actually on the track. With the second half of this track features Terminology, whose feature is just kind of okay in my opinion. Some of the bars are kind of questionable as well. One being, I was present when they invented the word calculator. Terminology also talks about how he's walking through the city with a perm and also with his jewels on as well, and how many rappers haven't lived that specific lifestyle. I must say though, his feature does pick up a little bit towards the end of this track with a couple of great bars, one being half a key like you broke his shit off in a door. Overall, I like this track a lot. The beat was really good, and Terminology's feature could have been a little bit better in my opinion, and I think Benny the Butcher carried most of the weight on this track. in my opinion. Different League, really good song. It was another hit in my opinion, and with that we are 3 for 3. Let's move on to track number 4. Track number 4, Can't Stop, features Stove God Cooks, Nina Sky, and Simba. Stove God Cooks is first up on this track, hitting us with his usual great wordplay. He goes into, on this track, topics of street violence and selling drugs. Nina Sky also hits us with a beautiful chorus, in my opinion. Verse number 2 comes from Simba, who gets into his father and how he was a drug addict and would frequently rely on drugs and alcohol throughout the day. He also talks about how his father's wife had left him as well. And then after Simba's verse, we're brought back to the Nina Sky chorus, which, in my opinion, ties this track off really well. Track 4, Can't Stop, another great track in my opinion. This is going to bring us to 4 for 4, and let's move on to track number 5. Track number 5, Unpredictable, we see the members of the Wu-Tang reuniting, and the beat from this song sample is Common's Hungry, so this track already just has 90s written all over it. Inspecta Deck is first up on this track, who sounds fresh as ever with his creative wordplay and lyricism. Ghostface Killah also has a solid feature on this one as well. He's hinting about how he still has a lot of lines that he hasn't used from many years in the past, saying, I got many verses in the safe written in Hebrew. Ghostface also gets into how he has no plans of slowing down and how he's even going to come back stronger. Raekwon is next up on this track, who brings us some really slick bars. Some of them even sound like they were written in his prime days. Method Man is last up on this track, and he kicks the energy up a whole nother notch. He came onto this track having the best flow out of anyone, in my opinion, with excellent songwriting as well to back up his nasty flow. Track number 5, Unpredictable, was another highlight in my opinion. This track was flawlessly executed. Wu-Tang, in my opinion, sounds as fresh as they did 25 years ago. Statik has yet to miss on this album. We are now 5 for 5, and let's get on track number 6. Track 6, Ain't Too Much to It, features Conway the Machine along with Ab-Soul and Bun B. The track starts off with this reversed kind of piano section, which sounds really nice, and then shortly transitions into this laid-back piano sample with a gloomy kind of vibe to it. Conway starts this track off rapping about, his usual coke bars and has his gritty persona along with it. He also talks about the street life and not wanting to be messed with, or else bad things are going to happen. Verse 2 on this track features Bun B, who tells us about the first time that he started hustling and how he had to adapt to the pressure that comes along with it. Towards the end of Bun B's verse, we get these hi-hats that come in, which complements his flow really nicely, in my opinion. And then later in this track, the third verse features Ab-Soul, who talks about the struggles of hustling and how there seems to be guns pointed at you at all times when doing so. We also hear some ad-libs from Westside Gunn scattered throughout this track, which adds to the melancholy vibe super nicely, in my opinion. The flow from Ab-Soul, though, could have been a little bit better, in my opinion, and that's really the only downside to this track. Overall, track 6, Ain't Too Much to It, was another great cut, in my opinion, and we are 6 for 6. Let's move on to track 7. Track number 7, Life and Times, features Joey Badass, which really excited me considering he's one of my favorite artists. I'm pretty sure he was like 4th on my Spotify Wrapped last year. Statik Selektah, production-wise, provides us with a very emotional string and piano sample, which is absolutely perfect for Joey Badass. Joey on this track complements this beautiful beat really well, where he talks about how writing rhymes was a form of therapy for him whenever he was, down in the dumps and a little depressed, and how he would do it from sun up to sundown, and it was a continuous grind for him. He also gets into how very few people thrive in life, and how change in people's lives is usually a big part of their success story. He also is pretty much saying that, life is what you make it, and you can either go one of two ways with your life. You can either choose to throw it down the drain and just say fuck it, or you can go the other way and make it something to, remember and leave a legacy once you're not here anymore. In the second verse of this song, Joey gets into how the path that he took for himself personally was really a challenge for him. And he also gets into the bumps in the road that came with it, and how at one point he was starting to have suicidal thoughts, but once he got past these suicidal thoughts, there was a fire in him that just could not be extinguished no matter how hard people tried, and how he now cherishes the obstacles and hardships that he's faced with, knowing eventually that he'll overcome them. And yeah, Joey pretty much killed this beat. He had a spectacular flow throughout and meaningful lyrics as well. This song was another hit. This was actually one of my favorites throughout the track list. And with that, we are 7 for 7. Let's move on to track 8. Track number 8, Droppin Bodies, greets us with just another really hard boom bap beat with a sick flute section at the end. We also have more of these ad-libs from Westside Gunn scattered throughout the track. This track features a rapper named Millies, who personally I've never heard of, but I was hoping just like Posness that he would leave a great first impression. And Millies did just that, sounding really sharp lyrically with an excellent flow as well. A lot of great bars on this cut as well, in my opinion. We get a sick Outcast bar, which says, "Outcast from this industry, but this outfit cost me 3 stacks, like Andre 3000. And yeah, while this track wasn't my favorite, that's not to say it wasn't good. Millies left a great first impression, like I said, and with this, we are 8 for 8, and let's move on to track 9. Track 9, It's Different, features longtime rap duo MOP. This duo consists of Billy Danz along with Lil Fame. Production-wise, from Statik Selektah, we get this really nice saxophone and piano beat with some strings incorporated in it as well. Lil Fame is first up to the mic on this track, where he talks about how he didn't make a lot of meaningful connections with a lot of people because most of them would just tend to talk behind his back when he wasn't looking. And also how people get judged for being real and loved for being fake and not their real selves. He also talks about how he himself doesn't need clout personally and how he doesn't need a blue check on IG and shit like that. The second verse of this song features the other MOP member, Billy Danz, who speaks on how he can't afford to take any more losses, and also how he's wasted so many years being in a state of fear and not having faith in himself personally. Verse 3 of this track features Cormega, who personally is another rapper that I have never heard of, so I didn't know what I was expecting of him. Cormega starts off this track by getting into how he doesn't like people who lie and snitch and do other things that are morally wrong. He also talks about the hardships of life and how it's essential to get you to where you want to be in life. We also hear Cormega speaking on how not many people are in the present moment, which I'm totally guilty of. Sometimes I'll be on Instagram without even realizing it. But yeah, overall, I really enjoyed this track. It was a super enjoyable listen, and Statik is yet to miss on this album. We are 9 for 9, and let's move on to track 10. Track 10, Lionhearted, starts off with a really weird introduction with just a bunch of sounds that kind of sound jumbled together, and it's just kind of a mess in my opinion. This track features Elzai along with Boldy James. Before I listened to this track, what I was hoping to get out of Elzai was kind of the same sound from his 2020 album 7 Times Down, 8 Times Up, which is the only album that I've heard from him so far. But that anticipation was short-lived, as his flow on this track is just not the best by any means, and his verse kind of sounds halfway done over this, not to mention is the worst beat in the track list so far in my opinion. And vocally, Elzai just sounds super monotone, which just gets stale within the first 30 seconds of listening to him. Lyrically, he sounds decent, but again, not great by any means. We then get a short chorus section from Royce the 5'9", which doesn't really add anything to the track as well, and was just felt kind of like unnecessary filler. We then hear Boldy James on the second verse of this track, and his feature also fell really flat as well, which was disappointing. His verse on this track just sounds so rushed, he's rapping so fast that it sounds like he's trying to catch up with the beat, and then it's just an offbeat mess at that point. And Statik Selektah shows us that he's human on this track, as this beat isn't really the best and just sounds kind of jumbled in a way. Track 10, Lionhearted, was the first miss in my opinion, and that's going to bring us to 9 for 10, and let's move on to track 11. Track 11, The New Joe, we see a rapper named Nems that, again, is a familiar face to me at least. And he's talking about how he is the new Fat Joe of this generation, but like, I don't know, man, you're just not that guy, buddy. With super surface level and corny lyrics. This is a great beat by Statik Selektah, just ruined by dog shit rapping. It's the only way to put it. Yeah, in my opinion, this was the worst track so far. It was short too, not to mention it was only like 2 minutes and just felt like kind of unnecessary filler in the track list. Kind of safe to say at this point that I could have very well gone without this song. Track 11, The New Joe, was a huge miss in my opinion, bringing us to 9 for 11, and let's move on to track number 12. Track 12, One for Ages, features the god Fahim, who I've heard a couple songs of his, but I'm not like too familiar with him by any means. The beat on this track is not my favorite, but that's not to say it's not bad. The god Fahim on this one goes into how he's continuously on his grind and has no plans of slowing down anytime soon, because the end goal of the grind is so much more rewarding when, you know, you have hardships that are in the way. He also says how you shouldn't be blinded by the money side of things and how it shouldn't interfere with your grind at all. There are plenty of great bars throughout this track as well from the god Fahim. He sounded amazing on this one. Nah, somebody who is translating the lyrics over at Spotify though, like, bruh, come on. Track 12, One for Ages, super solid track in my opinion, and that's going to bring us to 10 out of 12, and let's move on to track 13. Track 13 right here hits us with this absolutely gorgeous piano sample. This track features Marco Plus, who is another rapper that I'm unfamiliar with. He hits us with great wordplay and solid lyricism throughout this track. He says how if life is like a movie, then he's essentially the leader of this movie. The second half of this track features Coda the Friend, who I'm pretty sure is my most listened to artist on Spotify this month, so seeing him on this feature list was exciting. I mean, Coda on this piano beat was a match made in heaven. Like, he sounds fucking phenomenal on it. Coda and Statik Selektah definitely have excellent chemistry, as they have a solo album together, To See a Sunset. Coda the Friend, subject-wise, talks about how he is living comfortably and how he's made it in his rap career at this point. He says how even though he has this luxurious kind of lifestyle, he still never takes the small things in life for granted. Track 13 right here, super solid track overall, and might be my favorite so far, honestly, guys. Coda the Friend and Marco Plus both did their thing, and with this we are 11 for 13. Let's move on to track 14. Track 14, Limbo, hits us with a super mellow piano beat, which is just kind of decent in my opinion. The song starts off with ad-libs from A Tribe Called Quest's Q-Tip. Russ is the feature on this album, who I haven't listened to in a long time. I haven't listened to the dude since like middle school, so I really didn't know what to expect from him. We hear Russ on this song kind of singing instead of rapping, which I wasn't really a fan of, to be honest. Lyrically, he just sounds kind of decent at best. But the main thing I didn't really like about this song is how Russ kind of never switched up his tone at any point in the song, which kind of made it just go stale eventually. Not to mention that the song's only about 2 minutes in length, so this track kind of felt like more filler in my opinion. Track 14, Limbo, was not the brightest moment on this album by any means, and it was a miss in my opinion, and that's going to bring us to 11 for 14. Let's move on to track 15. Track 15, The Code, features Ruben Vincent along with Rome Streets and also Luca. with Rome Streets being the only artist out of these three that I've actually listened to. Ruben Vincent is first up on this track, where he hits us with super high-level wordplay, and subject-wise he goes into how the streets can seem to become a religion to some people. The beat on this track isn't as good as some of the others, but that's not necessarily saying it's bad either. We hear a kind of trumpet section on this beat, which I really like. Rome Streets is next up to the mic on this one, where he goes over his hardships and how eventually he achieved his goals with consistency and also hard work. Luca is the third verse on this one, saying how he used to trap on the down low when he still lived with his family at the time, and how he had a goal to successfully do so in order to end his family's struggling lifestyle. Track 15, The Code, was another valid song in my opinion, which brings us to 12 out of 15. Let's move on to track 16. Track 16, Got to Give, features Red Veil, with a beat that is absolutely perfect for him, as it sounds like something off of his 2022 album Learn to Swim. Red Veil on this track brings a lot of energy to the table while sounding absolutely phenomenal vocally, in my opinion. And he talks about how he's on his grind making music and how he puts his blood, sweat, and tears into it, and how he's had a passion for doing so ever since he was young. Track 16, Got to Give, was great. We are now 13 out of 16. Let's move on to track 17. Track 17, Vanilla Sky, features G-Eazy, who, again, I haven't heard in quite some time. Production-wise, we have this super slow and groovy beat with a nice thick bass line tucked under it. G-Eazy says how this is his first time in a long time being in the studio by himself, and how he also used to doubt himself in the past, but how he's gotten past those negative feelings. We hear him speaking on things that the rap industry tends to kind of not push out to the general public. We also kind of hear him comparing himself to other rappers, which personally made him feel like he wasn't getting anywhere. Then he ties off this verse saying how karma was going to eventually catch up to him. Track 17, Vanilla Sky, was a super solid cut in my opinion. I like the mellow vibe of it, and with this we are 14 for 17. Let's move on to track 18. Track 18, Factory, we hear from IDK with a super mellow guitar beat from Statik Selektah. IDK on this track just sounds decent. His flow really isn't all that in my opinion. He sounds kind of dry lyrically as well, but his voice on the track, however, does sound great, so that's a positive takeaway. IDK talks about how he wishes he could go back in time and find the perfect significant other, and how he also has to pick and choose the things about her. We also, later in this track, hear this really corny Timmy Turner bar, which caught my attention, unfortunately. He also says how speaking the truth to your girl can result in conflict and vice versa. Track 18, Factory, in my opinion, was one of the weaker cuts on this album. And with that, we are 14 out of 18. Let's move on to track 19. Track 19, In the Pocket, features Logic, who has a few songs with Statik Selektah. Before going into this track, I was hoping that Logic would put on a performance that was similar to his feature on Alarm Clock, which is also a song that Statik Selektah produced. Production-wise, Statik Selektah uses the same sample that was used on Marlon Craft's The Loop. Throughout the song, Logic is numerically counting up to 16, which represents the 16 balls on a pool table, hence the title In the Pocket. Logic sounds great lyrically on this one, having numerous pool-related bars on this track. So while this track wasn't as great as his Alarm Clock feature, that doesn't take away from Logic's creative lyrics at all on this one. Track 19, In the Pocket, was super solid. I can definitely see myself going back to this song, and with that being said, we are now 15 for 19. Let's move on to the final song, song 20. Track number 20, Full Circle, hits us with this great sounding, dreamy boom bap beat, which captures that 90s sound really well, in my opinion. Terminology makes his return to the mic 17 songs later, as he's the first one up on this track. Terminology on this song goes over how rappers from the 90s kind of paved the way for the new generation of artists. He also mentions how he grew up in a poor family and didn't want the same for his children. Next up on this track is Rex, who I'm not too familiar with. We hear him talking about his experiences with Terminology and how he went through the rap game alongside Terminology and would stay up all night and day recording music and writing lines. JFK is up next on this track with verse 3, where he is giving Statik Selektah his flowers and how he was a big influence to him personally and his rap career. We also hear him kind of reminiscing on how he would perform hundreds and hundreds of shows with his boys and how it was a nice full circle moment for him. He also speaks highly on other producers that helped him with his rap career, such as Ninth Wonder and DJ Premier. Overall, this track was a really beautiful closer and could not have been a better way, in my opinion, to wrap up this album. And with all of that, we are brought to our final ranking, which is 16 out of 20. This album, overall, as a whole, was great, in my opinion. I liked how Statik Selektah got a nice plethora of rappers on here, some from the 90s and then some from the newer generation as well. I really liked the production on this album as well, as I feel like Statik Selektah has kind of nailed his signature sound at this point. In my opinion, the best song was Right Here, and the worst song was The New Joe. And yeah, guys, that just about does it for this one. I would highly recommend giving this album a listen, as I liked it a lot. Thank you guys again for tuning into the channel. Drop a like, leave a comment if you're feeling like it, and of course, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, and I will see y'all in the next video. Peace.